the preface to the Tanya, Rabbi Shneir Zalman, the Alter Rebbe, the founder of the Chabad movement, he points out that anytime you give advice, every time you give advice about personal matters, if you're teaching Torah, you're saying keep Shabbos, everybody keeps the same Shabbos. But in matters of the heart, in matters of temperament, every person is different. So it's theoretically impossible to write one book that's going to be a fit for all, or to give one reply that's going to be a fit for all, because everybody has what they have to hear. They react differently. There are different emphases that have to be made, etc., etc. Says the Alter Rebbe, welcome.
Hi.
Says Rabbi Shneir Zalman, I'm not writing this book for everybody. I'm writing this book for those who already know me and I know them. And for those, I can write that book because I already know this group. So I can write a book that fits for you. I'm not writing it for everybody. Here we are 200 plus years later, and everybody studies Tanya. Whether you met the Alter Rebbe, nobody alive today met him in person. So why do we continue to study it? Because everybody who came after him understood that even though he wrote that, when he said, I'm talking about those who know me and I know them, he meant every single Jew. Because a man of his stature, a Rebbe, a soul who was sent down, cares for every Jew, knows everybody. He could write, I can't write a book that's for everybody, but he could write something and everybody finds something in there. So here we are, 7 generations later, 6 generations later, and we have the Rebbe in our generation. And he also gave a lot of replies and gave many people advice in many different areas of life. And you could ask the same question. The fact that the Rebbe gave an answer to one person, why is that relevant to me? And I think, I didn't see this written anywhere, but I believe the answer is the same. If I wrote something, or I said something, it would only be relevant to those people who have a similar temperament to the person I was talking to. But when a Rebbe says something, he is able to write and say things in ways that are going to be universal, at least for his generation. Proud, we consider ourselves to still be in the Rebbe's generation. So when a young man like Rabbi Shmutkin, a young rabbi, went ahead, compiled, worked hard, culled together many, many different replies that the Rebbe gave to many people in many situations, and he tried to put a book together. He put a book together, but his idea is to show the average Jew today how the Rebbe's advice is not just there how to become a better Jew, but also to live a better life. And I look at the book and I'm very impressed, although almost everything in there I have seen at least once before. But when you put it together in a book form, you compile together, you say, wow. And we invited Rabbi Shmutkin here. We have Rabbi Mendel here, he's my son. He's the one who really is, he moves the gears. He made this all happen. I'm going to let him take over. I'm going to sit in the back and behave, and only make sin if it's terrible. Okay, fine. Okay. So without further ado, here's Rabbi Shmutkin, here's Rabbi Mendel.
Right.
And
Can we put on the I'm a little bit.
you want to put on the AC?
Is everyone okay with that? No, the AC.
The AC.
People.
Okay. If you get too cold, we'll part of what his talk is about balance. So
Yeah.
we'll figure it out.
No, thank you.
Start with a couple words.
Sure. First of all, good evening, everyone. It's a real honor to be here, especially coming from the East Coast, where it's freezing cold. How many of you are from the East Coast? Anyone? Oh, it's a strong West Coast showing, actually. I thought usually most Jews that I meet on the West Coast, they told me they started on the East Coast. So this is it's pretty strong. So because of the intimate setting here on the West Coast, I spoke to Rabbi Mendel and I wanted to do a more interactive question and answers, discussion, comments. Before I get to the interactive part of the evening, I want to just share one idea. One idea from Jewish wisdom, from the Rebbe. By the way, is everyone here familiar with the Rebbe? Is that? Yeah, okay. From the Rebbe's counseling that actually has come to me in a sharper focus only after the book has come out. So a few months ago, I was driving in the car down the highway. I was in New Jersey, and I get a phone call from an unknown number. Okay, I'm debating, should I pick up, should I not pick up? You know what, let me take the call. I take the call, and on the other line, there's a man, and he introduces himself. He says, my name is so-and-so, I'm a rabbi in Ohio, and I read your book, and I love the Rebbe's ideas in it. But there's one letter in the book that it seems to me you didn't have the background story. And I want to share with you what the background story is. And he starts telling me that a few years ago he was watching an auction house, an obscure auction house, and he saw 4 English letters from the Rebbe go up for sale. Of course, he's very interested. He puts in a bid. He gets the sale. And it was put up for sale by a woman whose brother had recently died. And she had put up these letters that were written to her brother for sale. And she explains to him the background of these letters. She says, my brother was a brilliant guy. He had an amazing family, good education. And in the 60s, he was studying at Harvard University. And of course, he's one of the most prestigious colleges in the country. And by all metrics, he would seem to be doing extraordinarily well for himself. And he's succeeding in class, he's succeeding in his academic pursuits. But, she shares with the rabbi, my brother slowly, his inner world started pulling at him. And despite everything on his outside life looking perfect, he started feeling a lot of self-criticism, a lot of analyzing himself, a lot of questions of meaning, of his future, a lot of frustration in his relationships, a lot of frustrations with himself. And all of a sudden, heavier feelings were taking hold of him, which brought him further into a loophole of negative thoughts, to the point that he admitted himself to the mental health institute that was at Harvard at the time because he was considering to end his life. And again, to people in his surroundings, to people in his family, no, they didn't understand. But in his world, he's isolated, he's lost, he's in a rabbit hole, he's so much emotional pain. And his sister tells the rabbi that from the institute, from Boston, he writes a long letter to the Rebbe. He said he heard that there's a rabbi in Brooklyn, a Hasidic sage, who has the ability to take the 3,000 years of Jewish wisdom that God has gifted us and to distill it and to bring it down to the emotional experience that we have in this world. So he, from the institute, writes a long autobiographical letter to the Rebbe, describing everything about his life. Describes his childhood, describes his high school years, describes his college years. And then he gets into the whole inner world that's pulling and pushing him now. He describes his frustrations with himself and with his family and his relationships and his future and his career and his academic pursuits. And the tangle of emotions and thoughts that are overtaking him. Finally, his thoughts, that he can't deal with it. And he turns to the Rebbe and he says, Rebbe, give me something. Give me a key. Give me a pathway out of this pain, out of this darkness. What can I do to elevate myself from this black hole that I now find myself in? That's a letter that this young man sent to the Rebbe from Harvard Mental Health Institute in the 1960s. I'm driving, and the rabbi starts telling me he's a very expressive person. And he says, my role as a rabbi, Rabbi Garari can probably attest to this. I often, or sometimes, every so often, I get called in these intensive moments in a person's life. It could be themselves, it could be their siblings, it could be their children, it could be the parent. And I get called in as a spiritual leader to talk to the relatives, to talk to the sibling, to counsel the parent or the son about how to, talk to their hurting relative who's having such thoughts going through their mind of ending their life. And the rabbi tells me, he says, I would never have the faith and the courage and the spiritual insight to be able to say the type of words and the type of counsel that the Rebbe tells this young man. He says you have to be a Rebbe, you have to be someone that has a spiritual insight to a person's soul to know that not only will this advice not break this person, but it's actually the only thing that will elevate them from the darker place that they're in. So the Rebbe begins his letter to this young man, and he says as follows. He says, the answer, the path, the key out of your pain is in your own letter. If you take a look at your letter, and you look at it closely, and you think about it, you'll see within your own letter the key to getting yourself out of the painful, horribly painful state that you're in. But it's not in anything you wrote. It's actually in what's not in the letter. It's actually in what's missing in the letter. And the Rebbe zooms out, and the Rebbe starts explaining to him a key idea of Jewish wisdom that also reflects itself in the natural world. I'm pretty sure that he was a student of the sciences, this young man, and the Rebbe tells him that if you look at the universe, and if you look at the natural world, you'll see this principle as nature bears it out. And that is that each and every being in the world plays a dual role, plays two roles. We each have needs that need to be met. None of us are independent. None of us, even if we convince ourselves, none of us can live on an island. We all have needs that need to be met and nurtured and catered to by our society, by our environment. And that begins from everything from the plant world, the animal kingdom. Every tree needs soil, needs water, needs sunlight, has needs that need to be met by its environment. And every animal has the nurture and the nourishment that it needs and the shelter. We're all receivers. Whether we like it or not, we're receivers, and we have a role as a receiver. But alongside that, the Rebbe continues, and if you look at the universe, you'll see this. Every single being in nature also, and just as importantly, plays a role as a giver. It contributes something specific, actively, to its surroundings. So a tree will give oxygen, it'll give shelter, it'll give fruits, and the moon, it'll take the sunlight, it'll receive the sunlight, but give light back to the earth. A bee, will take nectar, it'll give honey. Every being in nature plays this dual role. But the human being is the only being in nature with free choice. So even though God designed the world to work in a reciprocal way, to work as a receiver and giver, to work that everything takes, but alongside that, everything does and must and should and could give and give back. The human being, who's designed to be that way as well, is able to sometimes lose touch with that and to become absorbed with our role as a receiver. And what that means is that subconsciously, we start evaluating everything in our life from the lens of our receiving. How is everything treating us? How is our family making us feel? How is our friends making us feel? How's our career making us feel? How's our job making us feel? Are they meeting my needs as much as I would like? Are they meeting my needs as much as I would expect? How's myself? How's my spouse? How's my future? And that becomes the center of our consciousness. That becomes the center of our thinking. And slowly we forget, we lose touch. We could, with our role as a giver. And the Rebbe continues to this young man and he says, by law of nature, necessarily is the actual English in the letter. When a human being loses touch with his or her role as a giver, you will necessarily experience profound emotional pain. Why? Because you went out of alignment with the very way God designed you and every being in the universe to be. And then the Rebbe turns to this young man in the letter, and he says, I want you to take a look at the letter you wrote to me. Take a look at that letter. Take a look at all the paragraphs and the long lines, autobiographical, that you wrote to me. And if you look at all those paragraphs and lines where you're writing about yourself, your self-perception, your past, your future, your thinking, you'll notice that you haven't written anything about what you're actively and consciously and proactively doing in your role as a giver. That part of you, that part of your life, that part of your mind, that part of your thinking has been lost. And then the Rebbe continues with a paragraph that's so powerful and so piercing. And I think when the rabbi told me that, he would never have it in him to say such words, I think he was talking about this paragraph, and I'll read it to you. You are much too wrapped up with yourself, with your own emotions and feelings and aspirations. You must get away from yourself and begin to think of others. It is time to begin an active participation in society, to give and give generously. The opportunities are many and the need is great. And the Rebbe closes off with different ideas and says, pick up your mind, open up a new window. Don't dig deeper into paragraphs. Don't get tangled in this frustration and this disappointment and this desperation and this hopelessness. The answer is not in there. The answer is actually in what's missing in your letter. The answer is actually in opening a whole new door in your mind that has been closed, that has never been opened. And when you expand your mind, and when you take the time to pause from everything that's going on inside you, and to actively think about your friends, about your family, about your community, about your society, and what you're doing in your role as a giver, you'll feel exponentially better. That is the Rebbe's letter. So I was, I'm driving and I'm listening to all this, and I tell the rabbi, I want to tell you two things. So first of all, I want to thank you. Why do I want to thank you? Because I remember reading these letters. And I was actually, in many ways, and I didn't know this at the time, had a lot of parallels with this young man at Harvard. Of course, I wasn't at Harvard. And I also wasn't, thank God, in such a dark place. But, I'm a young person. Thankfully, I have a good family, I have good friends, I have good teachers, I have good educators. Everything looks amazing. There's no reason to be down. And for many years, thankfully, I'm going through high school, I'm pursuing academic studies. I'm happy. And then, as your inner world emerges and you become a person of your own, and I'm trying to study the Talmud, I'm trying to study the Hasidic masters, I'm trying to study Jewish mysticism, things I've been doing for so many years. And, and my mind's not there. All of a sudden, I'm having these heavier thoughts about myself, become very self-aware, and you start analyzing yourself and your future and your relationships and who you are and where you're going. And for the first time, I'm having that experience of waking up totally unmotivated, feel heavy, can't get out of bed, start feeling heavier, you start thinking darker thoughts, and it takes you down a spiral. So you start thinking about your past, and you start opening it. Your first reaction is to open up those paragraphs, right? Think more about your past, think about your relationships, think about yourself, think about what's wrong, try to fight out the thoughts maybe. And it's spiraling. And it's a total surprise for me. I don't understand what this is. And I realized that I need to have some deeper spiritual wisdom that can give me the medicine from our tradition. And that's when I found myself opening up a whole large set of books that were actually for many years on the shelf, but I have never really explored them, and that is the Rebbe's private counseling, the Rebbe's letters. You're dealing with a set of 33, 34? What are we up to now?
Something like that.
33 volumes, numbering over 13,000 letters. And these are letters to people of all walks of life. You have teenagers, you have moms, you have dads, you have people older, you have people younger, you have people living an ordinary life, you have people in prison, everything. And the Rebbe is receiving their letters, and person by person, he's taking all those ideas that I learned in yeshiva for so many years in the abstract, and he's bringing it down to the thoughts and the feelings and the frustrations and the loneliness and the questions and the angst and the worry that they're having in the 50s, in the 60s, in the 70s. And it's aligning with the same human experience that I'm having today, or I'm having a few years ago. So I started reading one letter, another letter, and I started seeing patterns, I started seeing key ideas that the Rebbe teaches. And I started to try to implement them in my life. And from those ideas and from those letters, this letter to this young man at Harvard, and I didn't know it at the time to who it's to or to who it's about, struck me over the head in ways that I remember where I was when I read this letter. Actually, it's interesting. Who mentioned something about the Jewish Journal? They asked me, what's the one letter? If you could tell me one letter that changed your life. So I actually mentioned this letter. I didn't know the background of the letter at the time. This is a few months ago. 2 months later, the rabbi called me and told me this whole background of the young man at Harvard. So I'm talking to the rabbi, and I'm telling him that I remember what this letter did for me. What did it do for me? For the first time, I considered that the path out of this black hole that I somehow got sucked into is not in the black hole. It's not by, picking a shovel and digging deeper. It's actually by opening up an entirely new, different window, a different part of my brain, different part of my heart. And that is, and I started trying to implement this every day, to stop for 10 minutes a day, 15 minutes a day, to pause from everything that I'm thinking about, everything that I'm feeling about, and to think about someone else's life. How is their health? How's their studies? How's their financial situation? Is there anything I can do to make their life a little bit better? And I did this, for a few weeks, and I realized something that really was striking to me. I grew up in a Chabad family, and the idea of giving and the idea of being there for others was, you could say, it was part of my education, it's part of the way I lived. It wasn't a foreign concept. But I realized that you can give and give and give, but in your head, you never actually left your role as a receiver. You're thinking about the giving as part of your own perfection, as part of your own life. You never take the time to pause from all your goals, to pause from all your aspirations, to pause everything that's going on in your heart, and to really put it all on the side and say, what's going on in that person's life? It's time to begin to think of others, right? It's time to give. You're too much wrapped up in yourself. And when I did that for a week, for 2 weeks, for 3 weeks, for a month, to practice this counseling from the Rebbe, to open up that new door, I saw how it slowly elevated me. It slowly took me out of that rut along with a few other key ideas from the Rebbe that are in the book. And it brought me to an entirely different place of joy, of serenity, of peace. And it was that feeling of gratitude that I think all of you can relate to, when you go through a darker time and somebody helps you out of it, either a friend, a family member, a book. You feel so much gratitude that you're propelled to want to share it further. So that's what actually propelled me to write this book. So I'm talking to this rabbi and I'm telling him, I want to thank you, because he was the one who actually published this letter, right? He took out the name and he put out the letter to give it out to allow others to gain from it. So I said, I want to thank you. And second of all, I said, I want to ask you the question that I'm sure some of you have, which is, do you know whatever happened to this young man at Harvard? Whatever happened to him? So he said, I did a lot of research and I found that there was a rabbi in Iowa who knew him. And he told me this. He said he got out of his darker place. He became a very well-respected professor in his particular field of science. He had generations of students who studied by him, who loved him, who adored him. But he said in 1994, when this professor, who lived overtly a very distant life, you could say, from traditional Judaism, when he heard that the Rebbe passed away in 1994, he said this man was beside himself. He was crying. He couldn't find any solace. And this rabbi in Iowa asked this professor, he says, I don't understand. Why are you so distraught? Why are you so bent out of shape? Because a rabbi in Brooklyn passed away. So he told him, he said, for most people, the Rebbe is this great Jewish sage. And it's sad that he passed. He says, for me, I was in the darkest place of my life. And the Rebbe understood that what I needed to hear to elevate myself from that place was not a pat on the back, was not to dig deeper into my hole, was not to unpack my past, was not to think about my frustrations, no, I didn't need any of that. What I needed was someone to challenge me, to tell me that you're too much lost in your role as a receiver. You're reading everything in your life about how it's treating you, how it's giving to you, how it's meeting your needs. You've lost, you've forgotten. And you need to actively and proactively work on this now to think about what you are doing to give and give generously to the people in your life, to your community. And I think what's very important to remember in this regard and always is the empowerment that you could be a giver. I think a lot of times, for myself, when you get lost in a darker place, you don't believe that you have what to give anymore. So first of all, you could be a giver, and therefore you should be a giver, and therefore you must be a giver. And when you remember that, and when you act on that, you'll slowly find yourself in a happier and healthier place. So he tells this rabbi in Iowa, he says, of course I'm crying. This rabbi in Brooklyn put me on the path that has brought me to the health and to the wholesome place that I am today. So this is one idea from the Rebbe's counseling, from Jewish wisdom, that I want to share. And to me it illustrates that the Jewish people were the most resilient nation in history. We've gone through the worst atrocities, we've gone through the worst challenges that any people have ever gone through. And in our treasures of wisdom, there is so much medicine. There's so much tools that can help each and every one of us in our own ups and downs. And I've learned this myself through the Rebbe taking and digging into these treasures of wisdom and applying it in his countless letters to so many people going through the same experience we have today. It's so interesting to see the parallels, 2025, 1975, same. The manifestation is different, but the core struggles are the same. And to see the Rebbe taking these medicines and these tools and applying it was life-changing for me, and I hope that you'll find something inside this book and something inside these teachings from Jewish wisdom that will lead us all to the joy and to the serenity that we deserve. So thank you very much. That was the first idea I wanted to share, and I hope to continue in a more interactive way with Rabbi Ferrari.
Do a little
Robert
bit
Ferrari
of
Jr.
conversation style, and everyone feel free to have a question. I'm sure the lady's ready to take questions. First of all, I want to say it's my privilege to have known Levi for years. We go back to yeshiva years.
Sat on the benches together.
We sat on the same benches in the study hall in New York together. So it's my privilege that I know him as a friend also.
Yes, for sure. I think we sat near each other every day until COVID. I'm not sure we saw each other since then.
Yeah,
I'm serious.
Then, yeah.
It's pretty wild. So, yeah, it's an honor to be here.
Little did I know he was writing a book and all this was happening. So obviously, you wrote a book. It's all about, emotional health, I guess. That's the topic. It's obviously different than many other books that are out there. I mean, even if you just look at the title, it's called Letters for Life. It's not emotional health or whatever. I obviously see that it's unique. It's coming from Rebbe. So I'm going to ask Rabbi Levi, how would you say, how is it different than the other things that are out there? How is it unique? How is the Rebbe's counsel? What would you say? What's something unique or something different?
I think one key difference is the complete confidence and faith, and therefore a certain fearlessness that pervades every line of the Rebbe's letters. The Rebbe, one characteristic that you see throughout is this just deep, unshakable faith in God. That there's a orchestrator, there's a choir master to this world. And he's not just looking at the world as a whole, but he's looking at each and every one of us in our little life. And he has chosen each and every one of us to be here. And our life is part of that symphony. And therefore, when he writes to people, it's not with hesitation. There's a certain faith that he has in a human being, which is a reflection of his faith in God, that I think is in itself so therapeutic, because I know this, at least I know this for myself, you feel his absolute faith that you have it in you to overcome. And whatever darkness or whatever failure or whatever lower place you're in now, it's just a phase, because you have a soul and God has placed you in this particular part of the puzzle because you can and will surpass this. And I think that faith is unique and distinct from some of the other books you'll find on the shelf. It's one answer from the many answers to that question.
Anyone has any other questions? Feel free to. Yes.
Yeah, how did you know which letters to pick out of the thousands of letters? How did you?
That's a great question.
I want that one or that one. How did you figure that out?
Great question. So actually, partially for that reason why there's 100 pages of endnotes to this book, because there were so many amazing letters. And, I had them in the first draft. And then, as I'm editing, I'm trying to condense it. I want every word in the book every line that the reader reads to be the full value of his time. No redundancy, try to pack it in as much as possible to respect the time of the reader. So you start seeing, this letter is similar to this letter, so we have to take it out of the chapter. But it's such a gem, it's a treasure. I can't just take it out of the book. So I put it in the endnotes. That's how the endnotes slowly started growing. So it was a big challenge not because it wasn't enough to pick, it was too many that I wanted to put into the book. But ultimately what tipped the scale were a few factors. One was if I had some of the backstory of the letter, because a lot of the letters, I don't know what the person wrote, I don't know whatever happened with them in the end. So when you have more of the human story, it's easier for a reader to connect to the beginning, the response, the end. So that was certainly one factor. Other factor is if a letter is more, explains it more from the bottom up. In other words, the deeper idea in Jewish wisdom. Some letters articulate more. Some letters begin with the punchline, with the bottom line advice. So some letters are more explained. And at some points, I had to almost flip a coin. I have to say, it was really, really hard. A lot of times, it was just sitting there. I was pulling out my hair. I'm like, which one? So you really hit the nail on the head with that question.
Two things. I think the hospital you're talking about is McLean Hospital in Massachusetts.
Oh, okay, interesting.
Harvard is.
That's Harvard's.
Interesting.
The other thing is, how would someone read your book? From page 1, or just open it up to whatever chapter they want?
Ooh, that's a good question. So I'll tell you a little bit about the structure of the book. So the book is set up in 2 parts. The first part is called Essentials for a Healthy Life, and the second part is called Overcoming Darkness. And the reason why I set it up in that way is because one of the key ideas of the Rebbe is preventative medicine. He always spoke about that we put in so much effort in responding to illness once illness emerges. But we should put in an equal amount of resources in, or even more, in preventing suffering to begin with. And that's why I felt that in a book about the Rebbe, it has to begin not with responding to illness, but actually with the key perspectives, habits, exercises that maintain and create health to begin with. So that's the first half of the book, Essentials for a Healthy Life, 5 chapters. And the second part is Overcoming Darkness, which deals with more particular common challenges, such as discontent, worry, bad mood, self-criticism. So that's just in the general structure. You could read each chapter on its own. It is possible. They are relatively self-standing. I did try to build it in a certain way that each chapter kind of builds on the other or leads into the other, but you can absolutely read it in your own way and in special ways that I would have never imagined. Different people always told me that whatever they particularly needed to hear, somehow the Rebbe's letter came out of the book in the right page in the right time. So I wouldn't, whatever way is the right way. And each chapter is self-standing relatively, so it can absolutely do it that way as well. Yeah.
I'm sorry, I came in late, I guess.
Don't be sorry.
Started at 7:30, right?
7.
Huh?
7.
7?
You were early.
Anyway, when you're talking about the rabbi, you're talking about the Rebbe?
Yes.
Okay.
Well, in the story from Harvard, there were a few other rabbi characters, one from Iowa, one from Ohio. But usually, when I'm speaking about the rabbi, I'm talking about the Rebbe.
So I have a common question. A big theme as a rabbi myself is when people see a disconnect between what is needed physically to be done in response to a problem, medical problem, a doctor, an employment problem, to employment office, et cetera, and the spiritual response to an issue. I find that the Rebbe's teachings, the Rebbe doesn't differentiate between the two. It's almost fused into one. He sees a certain, I don't know the right verbiage for it,
Synergy, maybe.
synergy between the two. And I thought maybe you could talk to that point. Somebody calls me with a medical problem. I'm sure you're seeing the doctor, but I'm going to tell you about the prayer or about the various other things we do. I found that in the Rebbe's view, it wasn't two separate things. It wasn't two tracks. It was almost a single response. I don't think it's just my feeling.
So I want to say 2 points to this question. The first pertains particularly to physical health, and the second one is more general. A central theme in the Rebbe's letters, actually, this book is focused primarily on emotional health. So I didn't really get into physical health, but in countless letters, the Rebbe brings up how the body and the spirit are interdependent. And he says, look at the, what's it called effect? When you take a sugar pill. Placebo effect, the placebo effect. He said, look at the placebo effect, right? What do you see? You see that consistently in every study, a certain percentage of the people that it took a sugar pill, so there's seemingly no biological explanation, the fact that their optimism has gone up, the fact that they believe that they now have more chance to overcome their illness actually heals their body, right? In a measured empirical way. Their body was ill before, and you look at it after the placebo effect, and they're healthy. What does that illustrate? And the Rebbe says, this used to be more of a mystical idea. Today's science is bearing this out in tremendous ways. This interdependence of spirit and body. So again and again, the Rebbe says, for the biological questions, for the medication questions, for the therapy and health questions, the Torah teaches us, v'rapo yirape, there's an instruction actually from the Torah to listen to a doctor. And so many letters, the Rebbe says, you must listen to your doctor. You must. It's actually a mitzvah. It's a mitzvah in Torah. However, alongside that, and what will actually aid and is critical for the success of the biological treatment that the doctor recommends, is tending to the spirit of the patient, to make sure that their optimism, that their faith, that their inner strength is not only not hurt, but is nurtured and empowered, that they believe and are motivated and are optimistic about overcoming the illness. So one point, Rabbi Brari, about why it would seem that in the Rebbe's world they kind of just, meld into each other, is because there was, you see this more broadly, that the parsing that happens sometimes, say, this is only a biological issue, this is only an emotional issue, this is only a spiritual issue. A person's a wholesome being. The spirit, the emotional world, the physical body, they work together. You can't parse it. You can't say, well, I'm only focusing on this. You could only focus on this, but the person's actual health depends on all the parts of them, him or her, working in harmony towards healing. So that's why addressing the spiritual world and the emotional courage and the emotional faith is directly in synergy and in connection with the physical medication. And I think that also talks to more broadly, and this is a point also for emotional health, that, and this is my phrase, this is not from the Rebbe, but it seems from his responses that he felt deeply that 75% of a problem, of an emotional struggle, and in a certain level even a physical illness, is not the problem itself, but the worry about the problem. It's the worry about the worry, it's the fear about the fear, it's the ruminations about why, because we are very, very powerful. We're more powerful than we realize. And our thoughts, and the focus of our thoughts, has the metaphor I like to think about this for myself, it's not from the Rebbe, is that there's like a open hose automatically on in ourselves. And depending on where we spend our mental energy, just by spending our time there, it's a garden. There's weeds, there's going to be weeds, and there's going to be trees. And depending on where we spend our mental energy, just by being there, we're watering those plants. So if we're thinking about the weeds, we're caught up with it, we're worried about it, we're panicking about it, we're consumed by it. Just by being in that space of our brain, we're watering it. It's just going to grow. It becomes the center of our consciousness. And actually the illness, the physical illness even, continues to grow. And how much more so the emotional illness. But when we're able to move ourselves away and lift our brain and our thoughts and our feelings from the entanglement with the problem, that is 75% of allowing the problem to actually heal by whatever the professional tells you, by whatever the doctor tells you, by whatever the financial advisor tells you. Those are obviously necessary, and the Rebbe always sent to the professional for the bottom line 25% of the actual problem. But alongside that, you have to heal, and you have to pick up the brain from becoming totally entangled by the emotional or physical problem that's ailing you. Why? Again, because we're so powerful. Because by our very being there, we are feeding and giving a lifeline and growing the problem. And by moving our brains away from that, we're allowing the problem to actually heal. And it was a very strong letter to me about physical illness, which drove this home so strongly that the Rebbe even said this about physical illness, and I'll read it to you. And of course, every case is different, and of course, this is not a general opinion from the Rebbe. There's, physical illness that's primarily physical. But this letter brought out to me that this also applies, and it can also apply in a very strong way to physical illness. And I'll read you this response, and I'll end with that. The Rebbe writes to a young woman about her. She seemed to have some physical ailments. Didn't seem to be too serious, but something. And it was taking over her brain in crazy ways. Like, she was panicking about it, and she was consumed by it. She was anxious about it. And the Rebbe wrote to her like this. It appears that the primary reason for your condition lies in the fact that you are ruminating about it constantly. And the Rebbe underlines the word constantly. The more you divert your mind from it, the more your condition will improve, and the more effective will be the medical treatments you are pursuing. Continue pursuing those medical treatments, but you want them to be effective? Don't think about them the entire day. Do them, and do them as the best way possible, and then elevate your mind and focus on healthy parts of your life. To make diverting your mind from it easier, occupy yourself, underline, with something completely different. Whatever it may be, a job, studies, assisting others in their Judaism, and so on. And the Rebbe ends with this. If you divert your mind from it completely, underline, within a short period of time you will heal. This is an exception. You don't usually have such strong words from the Rebbe, but this is a letter about physical health, and it brought out to me again the power that our minds have on our body and on our emotional state. That 75% of a problem, especially in the emotional realm, only in the emotional realm, is not the problem itself, but our brains being consumed in the problem. So that's 2 points to that question.
I want to continue along those lines. So, for me as a Hasidic Jew, it's a given for me. If someone has an issue, you gotta ask the Rebbe. I mean, the Rebbe's everything. But for me, that makes sense for me. But for people, it might seem funny. The Rebbe is a religious person. And you have people from all kinds. People that are not religious, from all walks of life, that are asking the Rebbe questions. Do you find that the Rebbe is always biased? Always sending them towards religion? Sometimes yes, or would that even be an issue?
Well, explain your question a little better. I need a question to answer
Are
here.
you assuming that there's something wrong with that?
Do you find that the solution is always connected to more religious observance? Was there ever any time where you're kind of shocked where the Rebbe kind of steered them away from religious observance?
So it's kind of like what you're saying, you could either see a religious response or a philosophical, intellectual one, and they're both not equal.
Right.
If you're looking for religion, then that's kind of like God's response, as opposed to, you go out into society and you deal with a problem, and it's like, it's just an intellectual answer. So I guess there's two ways to see everything, depends on how you think. Either intellectual or religious.
Yeah.
Maybe I can answer some of it.
You want to answer?
I mean, the theme that I didn't read your book, I didn't read the letters from the Rebbe, but the theme that's in Judaism is the human natural, it's natural to be selfish. And when someone's selfish and he only takes and so on, he becomes very depressed, and yes, all kinds of psychological problems occur, whether it's obsessive compulsive or anxiety, or once you get out of yourself and you kind of undo it, then you, of course, solve a lot of the problems. So it's religious, it doesn't have to be religious, not religious. The thing is, what people do is do compensation. For if someone doesn't have understanding, so he tries to replace it with education. Thinks if I only get a PhD, then I'll solve my problem. If they don't have love, they try to replace it with something nasty. And that only causes more problems. So I think what the Rebbe is trying to say, get out of yourself and don't be selfish. I mean, in simplicity, right? And that theme will go throughout all the letters. It doesn't matter. I mean, any letter you see will be the same thing. He basically says, and that will solve your problems. If you become selfish, then let's say you start eating too much. So it compensates for your feeling of loneliness and emptiness. And that causes you all kind of medical issues. And everything like that goes like that. You take the entire psychology book, go one by one, and you could see it all points to the same thing. It's only one thing. If that's what you're trying to say.
So first of all, it's a beautiful insight. I want to respond to your question. I think so. I would say two things. First of all, there are letters that are certainly not about pushing someone to religious observance at all. The Rebbe was a person of Torah through and through, and the wisdom of the Torah permeates every letter of the Rebbe. And I'll give you an example of a letter I think illustrates this balance of what I'm talking about. This talks right back to the point I was speaking about earlier about 75% of a problem. It's a letter to a young woman. It's actually not a letter. It's actually a handwritten response. A bit of history, just from my studying the letters. In the 50s and the 60s, most of the letters are complete written out on a letterhead. But by the time the 70s and the 80s come around, you have a lot of the Rebbe's responses are handwritten, because there was so much mail coming in that it was impossible to give everyone a full typewritten letter. The secretaries couldn't keep up. So the Rebbe began responding often to people on the margins of their letters. He would write a response, and they have a little bit different character. They're more dense, more pointed. It takes more you need to sit there in every word and try to understand it. Just like from the study angle, is a different spirit. It's very interesting. So this is a handwritten note to this young woman who developed a fear of flying. Okay, she developed a strong fear of flying, an anxiety about flying, to the point that she couldn't get herself on a plane anymore. And it's clear, it seems, at least from the Rebbe's response, that this new fact of her life, that she can't get on a plane, was totally consuming her. She was panicked, I won't be able to get married, I won't be able to have a family, my life is done, I can't travel, I can't get on a plane, that's it, And so she has this phobia from planes, and then she's a totally destroyed person because of this. She's thinking about this all day. Okay, she writes a letter to the Rebbe. So the Rebbe writes this. I'll read it to you. It's in chapter 10. Diverting your attention to the extent possible from your fear will weaken the fear. Right? If you're not consumed by it always, it'll help weaken the fear. Okay. Now, of the considerations, and this is the interesting point that I wanted to see, of the considerations that will make it easier to not focus on your fear, how can we help your mind from being totally ruminating about this fear, panicking about this fear always, think about this. Consider that travel is not at all of central importance in a person's life. It's not of critical importance. Millions of people today, millions underlined, and more so in past generations, don't travel, not because they can't, but because they have no need or interest in it. Now the Rebbe says this. For the Jewish people, Shabbat and festivals, which epitomize days of pleasure, right? On Shabbat and Yom Tov, there's a mitzvah. There's a mitzvah in the Torah. God tells us you must have pleasure. That's why we drink wine. That's why we have meals. And yet, not only is it not a must, is it not mandatory to travel, it's actually prohibited to travel on Shabbat, right? So what does that show you? That shows you that from a Jewish perspective, not only are you able to live, what?
Pleasure is not a good thing.
That you can have, I mean, that's one way of looking at it, but the other way of looking at it is that you can get to the ultimate pleasure, you can reach the ultimate pleasure without travel, right? So it's not just that you can have a decent life, and not just that you can survive, but you can actually have a life full of pleasure and happiness and joy with your family, with your job, with your life, without having to travel. Now, take a second. When I read this answer, I took a few double takes. I tried to read it again and again. And it's very clear from the beginning that what is the goal of this response? It's not to say, oh, it's not a problem. No. The goal of this response is to get her back on a plane. Right? The Rebbe is trying to help her to get back on a plane. But what is the best way to get back on the plane? Stop panicking. You have to open your mind a little bit, open up some fresh air from thinking about this phobia always, because you're thinking about it keeps feeding it.
To remove the importance of it.
1 second, yeah. How do you do that? By realizing that even if in worst case, let's say, this fear will remain with you for the rest of your life, and you won't be able to get on a plane. You'll still be able to live a decent life. You'll still be able to live a life full of pleasure. And that understanding will allow you to not be so consumed by the fear, and therefore to actually overcome the fear, and therefore to get back on a plane. So why am I bringing up this letter in this context? Because to me this is a very interesting example. The Rebbe draws from the Torah, right? He says, look at Shabbat. Think about Shabbat. Meditate on Shabbat. Realize that Shabbat is a day in Jewish, God tells us in the Torah it's a day of pleasure. And in that day of pleasure, travel is not only not necessary, it's actually not advised. It's prohibited. And that should illustrate to you in your emotional struggle right now that you will be able to have a life of pleasure despite not being able to travel, which will counterintuitively allow you to travel again. So this is an example of a letter. It doesn't speak about religious observance, but you see the Rebbe's Torah-based and how that spills over in everything the Rebbe counsels. Well, I don't know. Hope that answers your question.
It definitely does.
Every day is Shabbat.
Yeah.
That might not be such a good thing.
There's one maybe something that's, I mean, you shared with us before the letter that struck you very hard. If there's anything else that stands out, something that was unique to you. I mean, you're obviously going through thousands of different responses and stories and.
I think that was unique to me. Well, I mean, everything. This is, something that was unique to me. You want the long answer or the short answer? What are you guys up to?
He's asking you for an example of something.
Oh, I got his question. I'm asking.
How much time do we?
Long
Well, we can't drive at night, so.
Everybody's here for the night?
Oh, are you sleeping? I don't know, it looks pretty night out there to me.
Uh-huh.
So I want to share one idea from the many ideas that has been on my mind lately. Because of, I have to give some background, and then I'll share the advice from the Rebbe that to me was very, opened up another way of thinking, and I think it's also very practical. So a few months ago, I was in Sydney, Australia, on the book tour, and I was speaking to Moriah College. Have any of you heard of Moriah College? It's like the biggest Jewish high school in the Western Hemisphere.
Over the mountain, Moriah?
No, it's not over the mountain, Moriah. It's in Sydney, but who knows?
Same name.
Just to win.
Went to Southern Hemisphere. Yeah, I spent a year in Sydney in
Oh yeah.
1993.
Southern Hemisphere. Okay, that's a good.
Just to win anyway.
Which rabbi were you at?
I was in Sydney.
I'm saying which part of Sydney?
Bondi.
Bondi. Okay, so it's right there. So I was speaking to the 11th grade. It's like it's thousands and thousands of students. I was speaking to the 11th grade, like 500 students. They're sitting in the auditorium, and we're discussing Jewish wisdom for emotional health. And there was a moderator. There's one of the teachers was doing the questions and the answers. And he asked me, about the book. He asked me about the letters. He asked me about Jewish wisdom. And then he gets to the question that, it seemed he was working towards the whole night. The whole night, the whole afternoon. Like that question. What's the question? Teenagers today, everyone in this room, there's so much pressure. There's so much pressure that comes at you. There's social pressure, there's academic pressure, there's your future, there's your physical image, there's your personal identity. There's so much that's coming at you. It's relationships. And a lot of the people in this room feel very unsettled, feel very worried, feel very anxious. A lot of the time, or maybe all the time. If you have one message, if you have one idea from the Rebbe that you can share to the students in this room, what would it be?
I'm kind of amazed at what I see as the Rebbe's perspective.
Mm-hmm.
We see the whole world as a beautiful picture.
Mm-hmm.
The Rebbe sees the negative. He's able to envision the holes that need to be filled.
Mm-hmm.
And that seems to be where he's coming from what I'm hearing in the answers. So I'm not making much of it in complete sense in my mind, but that's my impression. That's something to think about.
I think that's a very profound observation. Saying we see only what we see.
Yes.
It's those of us that have a deeper insight that see also what's missing, how it can be fixed, why there's so much pain in society, why there's so much hurting. Is that what you're saying?
Yes.
Yeah, it's beautiful. So back to Sydney. So this was the question, and you could hear there's like an absolute silence in the room. Everybody's, everybody has this question, and here I am, and there's 500 students, and I have, I need to say something, right? There's no option of getting up. My brain was turning, and for some reason it came to me to share with the audience a conversation that I had with a friend a few weeks before that. A friend of mine called me, a friend from yeshiva. We were together in high school, we were 14, 15, and then our paths kind of diverged, went different ways. I would say maybe did a more modern lifestyle than me. Got married, his kids, business, doing very well. And we haven't spoken for a few years. And then I get a phone call from him. Hey, how are you? We start chatting for a few minutes. And then, I ask him, of course, I always love to speak, but what what prompted you to call me just like that? So he starts telling me this. He says, his oldest child is now reaching the age of going to school. And him and his wife are very torn between two schools in town. One school, him and his wife feel, does good, does better with the emotional wellness of the child. They have the most up-to-date techniques. They have the most recent findings of cognitive child psychology. They know the newest modalities. And they're very in tune with that. But they're weak, he feels, they're weaker on the Jewish education, on the Jewish identity side of things. So the other school does a much better job on the Yiddishkeit, does a much better job on teaching Jewish connection, Jewish education. But he feels they're a little bit weaker. They're not as up to date with the emotional health needs of a toddler and what can be done for them. So he's telling me that him and his wife are very torn. Why? Because they feel strongly about both things. They feel strongly about the importance of addressing the emotional world of a child. And they also feel strongly about giving a strong Jewish identity, a strong Jewish connection. And they're going back and forth with each other, discussing which school they're going to send their first child. And ultimately, to them, it's really a big decision because it's really a question of where they're going to send probably most of their kids and, from here on. And it says, I saw you put out a book lately on the Rebbe's guidance for emotional health. Do you know, or do you have any insight or any ideas from the Rebbe on this question? So that was his question. So I shared with him a central idea in the Rebbe's counseling. Said, I don't like to play prophet, but I want to share with you this idea that pertains to this question. And what brought this out the most to me was a word of wisdom that I heard from an older woman in London. I was visiting her with a friend. It was my friend's great aunt. And she was telling us about her life, and she said that her father was a great Hasidic man, and he used to travel a lot after the aftermath of the Holocaust. He was, working on building Jewish communities and making sure the lost Jews are all around Europe. So it would very often happen that as she was growing up, her father wasn't home. Just the way she grew up. Father's not always home. Then her mother died. Her mother passed away. And all of a sudden, her father began staying home almost always. And to her, this was very strange. She said, I went to my father. I said, I don't understand you. She said, when Mama was alive, and he had all the reasons, so much more reason to come back home, to stay home, then you were so very often on the road. She says, now, when Mama is not with us anymore, and I would think you have all the more reason to be out and not be at home because Mama's not here. Now, all of a sudden, you're here all the time. What's the logic here? This makes no sense. It's counterintuitive. So she said, and this was something that stayed with me. She said her father looked at her. And her father said, in order for me to travel far, I need to have a home to come back to. So when Mama was alive and I had a real home to come back to, I had a wife, they had an unbelievable marriage. I felt I had a real home to come back to. I was able to travel the world. I was able to go to this country and to that country and to this city and that city. Why? Because in the end, I had a home to come back to. He says, now, when Mama's not alive and I don't feel that I have a home to come back to, I can't find it in me to travel. I can't go anywhere. And I shared this with my friend, and I said, a consistent idea in the Rebbe's emotional health counseling is the critical importance of having a spiritual home to come back to have a clear rootedness in identity, in a connection to Jewish people, in connection to God, in connection to the Torah. And it's not something for spirituality or for religious reasons also, but for the basic emotional strength of a person. You need to have a spiritual home that you know with the clarity and the depth of your soul, this is where I can come back to. And you see this in the letters in the 60s where you have, the young people are revolting and they're burning down campuses and the parents are writing to them and says, Rebbe, I don't understand what's going on with my kid, what's going on with my daughter, what's going on with my son. And the Rebbe explains to them that they feel homeless. You haven't given them a rootedness in something transcendent. They see through the money, they see through the careerism, they see through the materialism. And at the depth of their soul, they're unsettled, they're anchorless, they're unhinged almost. They're not connected, they don't have deep, real roots, they don't have a spiritual home. And I told my friend, I said, what I see in the Rebbe's counseling, there's a short-term emotional health, but there's a long-term emotional health. In the short term, it may very well be that this other school is better in addressing the emotional health of a toddler. But what I see in the Rebbe's teachings from the Torah, of course, and I've actually seen this in life. I told him, I've been around the block, and I see that if a child hasn't been given a clear spiritual home, a clear spiritual rootedness, it can haunt them into their 20s, into their 30s, into their 40s. There's a vagueness, there's an unclarity, there's a rootlessness that follows someone throughout their life. So I said, your child will anyways take the journey that he wants. They'll anyways travel far. They'll go their own way. You won't be able to control them anyway. But what you can do is you can gift them. The biggest gift you can give them for their long-term emotional health is that they have a clear spiritual home that's theirs, a clear sense of identity. They're a Jew, they're connected to Yiddishkeit, they're connected to God, they're connected to their soul, they're connected to the Torah, they're connected to 3,000 years, they're connected to the people. You can come back to this. And that, in the longer arc of emotional health, is a much bigger contribution than whatever momentary benefits you'll have from another school. I said, this is something that I believe from the Rebbe's counseling. So I share this all with the students in Sydney, and I said, if there's one thing I could say from the Rebbe about how to navigate this world, today's world, with all the pressures, all the stress, with everything that's coming our way, it's this idea. That the pressures will come. There's going to be the social pressure, there's going to be the economic pressure, there's going to be the jobs. That's part of life. That's just part of living in this world in 2025. But if you want those winds to not overthrow you, if you want to not become totally lost by them, what you can do, and what each of us can do, is to work on building a spiritual home that we can come back to. And that takes once a week or once a day to dedicate time to something higher, to something bigger than the minutia, than the news, than the finances, than whatever stresses coming at us. Say this is spiritual home. It could be a study of Torah. It can be putting on tefillin. It can be lighting the Shabbat candles. And that it allows us to travel far. Once we have that, we can travel far, and we'll bump into all types of bumps in the road, but it won't overthrow us. Why? Because there's something that's bigger, that's more important. We have a primary place that's transcendent of all those things. And I shared with them the story, which is the story that I think illustrates this point from the Rebbe, and I'll end with this. It's a short story. There's a woman named Mrs. Rachel Volvovsky, and she was in her late 20s, and she had at that point already 5 kids, and she was running a preschool. She had a lot going on in her life. And, yeah, she was a very strong woman. But So of course, there's a lot going on in her life, and she loved all her roles. You know, she wanted to continue, but she turned to the Rebbe's in the 1980s, and she asked for advice for what she can do to balance, to not be overthrown by all the stress that's coming at her. That shouldn't eat up her emotional state. That she should be able to. And again, at that time in the 1980s, the Rebbe was writing more shorter handwritten responses, and the Rebbe writes to her a brief answer. He says, light Shabbat candles without stress. Light Shabbat candles without stress. And I heard of this response, and something about it pulled me in because I felt there's something, very interesting. So I tried to call her kids to get some of the backstory, and she actually had 11 children. Yeah, she had 11 children. And I got the runaround. This guy says, call my brother. This guy says, call my sister. And I finally got the two of the children that were willing to say something about this. And I'll read to you a few lines of what they told me over the phone that I think to me illustrates this point of having a spiritual home and setting aside that time to building that spiritual home and how that can allow us to travel everywhere and be healthy. And the Rebbe says, her son, his actual name was Levi, told me this on the phone. Said, in addition, he described Friday in his home growing up. He said like this, in addition to her 11 children, my mother always hosted many guests for Friday night Shabbat dinners. So she had her 11 children, she also had a lot of guests. So there was good reason for her to feel pressure right before Shabbat. I don't know if any of you have been or have your own. Right before Shabbat is one of the most high time pressures in a Jewish home. There's a lot going on. However, despite being all the reason for pressure right then, I remember this vividly. As the sun was coming down and the time for lighting the Shabbat candles arrived, a serene cloud came to rest on my mother and everything around her. Something otherworldly. If I had anything I needed to wrap up before Shabbat, instinctively I would move somewhere else to do it. So my mother never told me a word. She never told me anything. It was the calm spirit she radiated simply didn't allow for rushed energy nearby. She was good. There was something else that came into the room. And then another one of her sons, his name was Yosef, told me this. Reflecting on the Rebbe's response, another of her sons observed. So the Rebbe didn't advise her to lessen her activity, right? That would be the easy response. Oh, why don't you drop one of your jobs? Why don't you drop one of your kids? I don't know. No. The Rebbe didn't say that, right? He didn't counsel her to fight her feelings of stress. And he also didn't say it wasn't an issue, right? He didn't say it's not a problem, no. Instead, he recommended creating a serene space of light, an oasis in time at the culmination of one week and the cusp of the next. So I heard from my mother how this helped her maintain her emotional balance. And I personally witnessed its effect, he told me. These sanctified minutes hovered over her week and life. Despite keeping a busy and productive schedule until her last days, internally, she was a woman at peace. So, coming back to your question, this response, something about the imagery of that symbolized to me a more broader theme from the Torah that's in the Rebbe's teachings of creating a home, of creating a spiritual home, creating a rootedness. And it's a practical thing that each of us can do once a week to set aside a half hour that's dedicated to creating a spiritual home. We're lighting Shabbat candles, studying Torah, prayer, tefillin, you name it. But to understand and to appreciate that that's not only a contribution to our spiritual life, it's not only a contribution to our Jewishness, it's actually the best thing we can do for our emotional strength in this world. And I saw in the students in Sydney how it's aligned with the type of angst, the type of stress that they were feeling. And I'm sharing that in response to your question.
Wow. Beautiful. So thank you so much, Levi. There's no question that the Rebbe's teaching, the Rebbe's counsel is unparalleled. And you did a great job with this book on emotional health.
Thank you.
I recommend everyone to get it. And thank you for your book. And thank you for joining us tonight.
For sure. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. If I could add, the Rebbe is actually empowering.
Yes, for
She's
sure.
overwhelmed. She has enough on her plate. You can say the Rebbe is giving her another job. Or you can say the Rebbe is saying, you're not going to become unbusy. Your life's not going to, it's going to remain hectic. But here, take 5 minutes. And you have the ability to make those moments come. When you crack that nut, when you have that, it will permeate the rest of your life.
Yes.
I think it's a powerful
Yes.
statement.
Yes. That's beautiful.
I think that goes to something else. Again, going back to what I said earlier, is part of being selfish is giving importance to all kind of things, kind of like items. The flight is important, and this is important, and the job. So everything causes a lot of stress. By doing something outside of what you know, it's considered, of course, towards God, but you're doing outside of what you consider all these little idols that become important to you. That's your sanctuary. You're getting out of yourself. Same thing.
Yes. Beautiful. Thank you, Rabbi Garari Sr., Rabbi Garari, my friend. My honor to call my friend Rabbi Garari Jr. You should know that he was considered a prodigy in the Talmud, and still is. So you should know what you have in your midst, and yeah, it's an honor to be here.
Let's just say go join the Talmud class
Yeah.
if you would only know.
Yeah. All right. If anyone wants the book, I think the
book
rabbi's
is
selling it.
available for sale. I can't recommend it any higher. It's $25, and great book.
No
Buy
tax.
one for yourself and your friends, and
No tax. And there is
All right.
refreshments outside. Not outside.